from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and on this episode, we will be talking to Robert Carlo, who is one of the founding members of the Cleveland 10-Point Coalition. Welcome to Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and I am so excited to have you with me today on this podcast. And I have a very special guest joining me today. It is someone I met several years ago. He happened to be a candidate for mayor of Cleveland, and we began talking about the work that Indy 10-Point was doing in Indianapolis to address the issue of violence, and we became friends, and this gentleman was very instrumental in helping to bring the 10-Point model as we kind of did a pioneer program in Cleveland. And my special guest today is Robert Carlo. Robert, how you doing?
Reverend Harrison, doing really well. Thanks for those kind words. Great to be on this with you, and thanks for the invitation.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And for those who are listening, Robert, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? What are you doing now? And then we can get into the conversation about Cleveland 10-Point.
My pleasure. And again, thanks for the opportunity to keep it simple, which I try to do. My priorities in this order are: I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I have been for 22 and a half years, thanks be to God. I'm a husband to my wife, Leah. We just celebrated our 8th anniversary yesterday. Another thanks be to God. And then I'm blessed to be the father of 3 children: Lincoln, who's 6, Winston, who's 2.5, and my daughter, Colette, who just hit 8 months, and grateful for the family. From a professional standpoint, I'm 31 months back with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and by God's grace, recently in December of 2021, I was promoted to be the state director for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes in Ohio. Our mission is to lead every coach and athlete into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ and His church, and we're grateful to be serving athletes and coaches from the elementary school level all the way up to the professional ranks, encouraging men and women to stand for Christ, to instill values of excellence and integrity, teamwork, and servant leadership all across the state of Ohio. And thankfully, actually, Reverend, you'll be glad to know our regional office for the Great Lakes region is in the great state of Indiana, your wonderful state, in fact, in Fort Wayne. So I'm in Indiana a lot, which is a blessing.
Well, that's so good to hear. Well, Robert, let's talk a little bit about, because I think at the time when I met you, I think you had just stepped down as being the director of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes for the state of Ohio. And you are a candidate interested in running for mayor of Cleveland. And I know one of the major issues that was a concern to you was certainly the surging violence that was happening in Cleveland. And I think it is in that context that, we met and developed a friendship over, the last several years. And kind of talk about, this whole issue of the violence that the city of Cleveland is facing, and what led you, one, to want to run for mayor, and two, looking to bring, at that time, the 10-Point model to your city.
Certainly great questions, Reverend, and hard to believe it's been 5 years since we've been friends. My life is certainly better for knowing you and the 10-Point model.
Well, thank you.
As you asked the question, thank you. As I go back to that time, really, my wife, Leah, and I, in the latter parts of 2016, you're right, at the time I was state director then as well, and we just felt the proverbial knock on the door that we needed to be available to serve. We know it's better to serve than to be served, said Jesus, and it was clear that the city of Cleveland then and even now was experiencing some serious problems, and we wanted to just step in and help be a part of the solution. And of course, a city like Cleveland is bigger than any one person. There's nearly 400,000 residents of this city. But it was very clear that once Leah and I said yes to being a candidate, yes, we had to set aside the FCA role to do it. But within the first weeks of campaigning, it was abundantly clear that the people were very clearly saying that we needed to address the root issues of crime and violence. And it was a gentleman who mentioned that former Mayor Greg Ballard of your wonderful city there in Indianapolis, we drove out there to meet, and that's how we were connected with you, which, again, thanks be to God, because whether it was then or now, there are far too many of God's children that are dying in the streets of Cleveland and all throughout the United States, and we want to see them fulfill their God-given potential, and we believe a model like 10 Point can help become that a reality.
You know, Robert, one of the issues, and I think we talked about it, and it's really challenging for a lot of urban cities is, this whole issue of how disproportionately the violence is impacting communities of color, particularly, black neighborhoods where in most cities, sadly, anywhere from 7 out of 10 homicide victims tend to be black, and most of those tend to be black males. One of the challenges that I think we face, in urban cities is that it tends to be viewed as a black problem. And sometimes, here in Indianapolis, the suburban areas really didn't feel like it was their issue because it really, go back 10 years ago in Indianapolis, it really wasn't impacting them. What is that similar in Cleveland, or is it a little bit different in Cleveland compared to Indianapolis when it comes to maybe some of the areas outside of the hotspot areas in Cleveland? Does the whole city see it as a problem, or is it viewed as a problem that is impacting primarily the black community?
Well, Reverend, I think traditionally, because there hasn't been as much exposure for a lot of the folks in the suburbs or inner ring suburbs, typically their experience in a city like Cleveland is going to a Cleveland Cavaliers game, a Cleveland Browns game, a Cleveland Guardians game, Playhouse Square, et cetera, and they're not being exposed to the root issues in inner cities. It was really because of that mayoral campaign that my family became aware of these issues. And so I think it's an exposure issue. And I'm convinced the people I've met along the way, like you, that are sterling examples of serving others, this is a humanity issue. I mean, the second great commandment, which is not the second great suggestion,
right.
It's a commandment. It's to love your neighbor. And I think for too long we've been siloed, and suburbs, inner city, African American, Caucasian. I think we've got to put these silos down, and we just have to start loving our neighbor again. And I think that happens by stepping outside of your comfort zone, getting acclimated with your neighbor wherever they may live. And I think when people get exposed to these problems, it's more inevitable they're going to want to be a part of the solution.
So when you were running for mayor, and I know you started having a lot of conversations with residents all across Cleveland, what were you hearing from people that you were meeting with and talking to when it came to the issue of crime and violence in that city?
I think it was twofold, Reverend. You could see the fear, quite candidly,
right.
in the citizens' eyes. It was tangible. So I think there's legitimate fear. And what really saddened me is that there seemed to be a deeply rooted sense of hopelessness, meaning, is this ever going to get fixed? Which was a big reason why what a godsend the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition model is, because it provides tremendous hope. It's proven, data-centric, faith-based, holistic, and it's been on the streets for a long time. And I think, if anything, the hope was, and it still is, that we can increase hope, we can eliminate fear, and we can do it together. And that's clearly what I was seeing then, and our hope is that we can address that head on.
Were residents, Robert, providing what they thought were some solutions, or what may be driving the violence in Cleveland?
One of the things I heard a lot, and it's a phrase that's kind of interesting because you think of how serious what they're saying. We know the old adage, drive-by shootings,
right.
and how those can be traumatic. But I think there's a perception in some of these inner city neighborhoods that a lot of the leadership and a lot of the people that would have the ability to make a difference are literally driving by, in the sense of not being invested in those communities. We're hopeful in Cleveland. There's a new administration, and he seems to be wanting to make a difference. And I think, if anything, there's a perception in inner city communities that they're not being focused on, and we're looking to do whatever we can to change that paradigm.
I think one of the things that I think excited me about Cleveland, and you know, I not only work with the Indianapolis 10 Point Coalition as the board president, but I'm a part of National 10 Point. But I very rarely see cities that tend to have a bipartisan approach to addressing the issue of urban violence. And I think, Robert, one of the things that you were instrumental in doing was, I think, bringing a bipartisan approach in working with leadership in Cleveland, which has been Democratic leadership, and getting Republicans involved in it from the state level. And I know you helped, Indy 10 Point and 10 Point Midwest have a meeting with the governor and the attorney general, and to really talk about not just the 10-point model being brought to Cleveland, but statewide. Would you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's something very unique, I feel, that's not really happening in cities across the country. It seems to be more Democratic driven, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of bipartisan support around an initiative to help drive down this violence that certainly is killing too many of our neighbors.
And it's tragic to know that too many lives are being lost. And the motivation, ultimately, back to love your neighbor, is that young people would fulfill their God-given potential. And I think politics as a whole, it's interesting, I would say this as a former candidate, I can't stand politics,
okay.
But I do appreciate serving.
Okay.
And I think when you're called to serve, you don't pick and choose who you serve. You serve Republicans, Democrats, African Americans, Hispanics, Latinos, Caucasians, rich, poor, everything in between, because we're here to serve. And I think, if anything, when I look at someone, I don't look at them as Republican or Democrat. I look at them as human beings that are equal, that need to be a part of the solution. And it's just been a blessing that, for whatever reason, here in the state of Ohio, we've had a receptive audience with the governor's office, with the attorney general's office. Of course, you remember those meetings we had. And
right.
I think, if anything, we've tried to unite people by focusing what we share in common versus what separates us. And what we have in common is that we're all human beings that are better when we serve together.
So do you think this is an approach that can be used not just in cities across Ohio, but nationally? Is there an interest, a bipartisan interest in bringing people together to come up with solutions, to try to end this cycle of violence that is claiming the lives of too many young people, in particular in our country?
So, you know what I'm finding, Reverend, in the 5 years that I've known you and doing what I can to help, when we push through the rhetoric that the media bombards us with,
okay,
and we get to a table and sit down together, it's amazing how much we have in common.
Right.
So I think, I can't speak for other states. I'm a citizen of the state of Ohio, but I would think it would be very healthy if people who care about others, which 10 Point certainly is such a great model to do in such a substantive way, let's get to tables all across cities and states, all across the United States of America, and let's begin to listen to one another. Let's begin to, as Stephen Covey once said in his classic book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think if we take that humble approach, we're going to find, whether we're Republicans or Democrats or state leaders or city leaders, we have far more in common than we have that are separate. And I think 10 Point could play a catalytic movement to help create those kind of spaces to have those conversations.
Well, one of the things I was really impressed by, too, the several times that, I had a chance to visit Cleveland along with Elder David Cody and Reverend Terry Webster Sr., was some of the meetings that you brought us into from residents and the business community and other grassroots organizations around Cleveland. I was impressed at one, how you did it, and two, to see the synergy, the energy around trying to tackle this epidemic that sadly plagues too many cities in our country.
Well, Reverend, that's very kind, and certainly the model that you and the gentlemen you just mentioned and all things 10 Point create tremendous opportunities to have those kind of synergistic conversations. And again, it goes back to, it's the third time I'll say it, if we're really serious about loving our neighbor, then that means everybody has a space to play in this. And I think, if anything, I'm still learning daily on best practices, and you've taught me a lot, Reverend, but when it's all said and done, you've made it clear that for 10 Point to succeed, it has to be collaborative, it has to be cohesive, comprehensive, and you need to have all the key stakeholder groups working together. So if anything, it was just following your lead to try to send invitations out to stakeholders in Cleveland to come to the table and have those kind of conversations. So if anything, it's kind of a roundabout way of just giving thanks to God and to you, Reverend, for creating a model that is so collaborative.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and the special guest with us as we talk about the issue of violence is Robert Callow from Cleveland. He is the state director of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Robert, one of the things that did happen, and we kind of started a little pilot program in Cleveland in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood, where ministers and members of the community started patrolling, and I'm not for sure how many months we did that in the Cleveland, in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood in Cleveland. But I do remember it was cold during that time that we were out. So can you kind of talk a little bit about how that was formed and what happened during that period of time, where we did have boots on the ground for a period of time in Cleveland, kind of a pilot program to see if it would be effective?
Well, it definitely was cold, Reverend. I remember we started in October, I believe, of 2018, and we probably marched those streets probably around up through February of 2019. And I'm sure, like Indianapolis, it gets cold in Cleveland during those times. But I'll tell you, it was fantastic. It reminds me of Chaplain Cody, who you referenced earlier. He always would say there's nothing more important than the ministry of presence.
Right.
To be present. And we had a small but dedicated group of patrol people out there, myself included, and the relationships that were forged. I mean, we had a diverse group of stakeholders canvassing the streets, if you will. And I remember the first response of some of the citizens was like, "What are you all doing out here?" But by the time we got through that and actually listened to their concerns, shook hands, prayed where appropriate, connected people to resources, it was a paradigm changer for me, Reverend, because it really, walls came down, unity emerged, and there was a real sense during that time, and of course it was a limited time as a pilot project, if you will, that we're onto something, or you're onto something really special, which is to bring that presence into those areas of inner cities that need it most. And I think, God willing, if it truly is going to happen here in Cleveland and cities all throughout the country, those 5 months or so really proved to me that where the rubber meets the road is having boots on the ground, connecting with citizens and at-risk communities, building relationships, and connecting those individuals to resources. We were seeing that happen frequently.
What perceptions, while you were on the streets in Mount Pleasant, did it change, or what did you learn? Did you experience anything different than you may have thought before you started doing those public safety walks in Cleveland in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood?
Well, I'll keep it close to home. First of all, Reverend, what I learned is that I still had some fears that I had to face.
Okay.
I had to get out of my comfort zone to get out on those streets. And God bless my wife. She's like, "Robert, if you're going to help facilitate this, you got to be out with the team." And I'm so glad that she encouraged me to do that, because it put me on the streets with the team, and it helped me personally overcome some of those fears. And then from a perception versus reality perspective, again, it goes back to something I think I shared earlier in this interview. When you get in front of someone and have a conversation, perceptions seem to fade, And that human-to-human interaction just becomes so incredible. And I think, if anything, again, after the surprise of being out there for some of the folks we were connecting with, they were appreciative, and they started to share ideas that I think, from a grassroots perspective, could go a long way to bettering cities all across America. Someone once said that in cities like Cleveland or Indianapolis or wherever you may be serving, you got to be able to connect the grassroots to the treetops. And I would humbly suggest that was starting to happen in a wonderful way in Cleveland, and we're hoping to see it happen again.
Well, we certainly do. And to let those who are listening, this is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and my guest is Robert Callow, Director of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes for the state of Ohio. Well, we do have a new mayor in Cleveland, and 10 Point Midwest and National 10 Point has been meeting with the new mayor, Mayor Justin Bibb, his public safety team. Matter of fact, they paid a visit to both Fort Wayne, Indiana, where they met with the Fort Wayne 10 Point Coalition and the mayor's office, Fort Wayne United. And then they traveled to Indianapolis and had a chance to meet with the police department and Indy 10 Point. So it was a very fruitful, I think, trip for the people from Cleveland, from the mayor's office. And it looks like, Robert, that we are heading toward, launching 10 Point in Cleveland sometime later this year or the first of next year. So it looks like we're on that path. And it looks like Mount Pleasant may be the neighborhood that we started in, which was the neighborhood that became the pilot program that you started there several years ago.
Well, things come full circle in God's perfect timing. That warms my heart to hear that, Reverend. Thank you for your perseverance and for your availability to help the city of Cleveland take on this wonderful initiative. And it kind of reminds me in Psalm, I believe it's 133, it says how pleasant it is when brothers and sisters dwell together in unity. I have a feeling it's intentional that this would take root in a neighborhood called Mount Pleasant, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help.
Well, I sure will, Robert. One other thing before I let you go. What would you say to other cities across the country and neighborhoods, because you talked about this a little early, who may have that hopeless feeling that nothing can be done about the violence? What would you say to other cities and residents and neighborhoods across the country, and even in Cleveland that may not be aware of what was going on in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood and cities across Ohio?
Well, Reverend Harrison, great question. And you didn't tell me to say this. You know me well. I'm just going to speak from the heart. You're a dear brother in Christ and friend. I think it's seek out experts who have proven that they can help fix this systemic problem. And I would say 10 Point should be at the table. And you've always said this, Reverend, that 10 Point Coalition isn't the only answer.
Right. But
you are a major convener and a big part of the solution. And I would encourage cities all across the Midwest, the United States of America, and dare I say across the earth, reach out to an organization like 10 Point. Reach out to someone like Reverend Harrison, who has had boots on the ground for 2+ decades and has taken the model from where it was to where it is today, and to really seriously consider doing something different. You know, the old different, analogy of insanity, they say, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. You, I believe, Reverend, help bring a different result. You've always been humble and collaborative, and I think, and I've always encouraged our leadership here in Cleveland to sit with you and to listen, because I think they're going to hear some solutions that are fresh and can help galvanize the community to better outcomes.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining me today in this conversation, as we have had some real talk, and certainly I will bring you back and we will talk again. Hope that I see you very soon. I'm hoping to get to Cleveland within the next month to meet with the ministers in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood and also city officials. I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and this has been Real Talk. Join me next time as I bring you more real talk about the real issues that affect our communities here in Indianapolis and across the country. Next week on Real Talk, we will have 3 neighborhood leaders here in Indianapolis that have started doing public safety walks. And one of those individuals will talk about the amazing work that was done in the Butler-Tarkington neighborhood when law enforcement, 10 Point, other grassroots organizations, and the neighborhood association themselves addressed gang violence that led to 6 people being killed. But that neighborhood, through a new initiative, went 2.5 years without a homicide. 4 out of the last 6 years, that neighborhood has gone without a homicide. So be sure to tune in next week. Also, continue to follow Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison and subscribe to it on this podcast by sharing this episode on Facebook and Twitter. I need your help in spreading the word so more people can hear about real solutions that help address some of the real problems that we face in neighborhoods, in cities, in states, and in our country. Thank you so much for joining me on Real Talk with Reverend Harrison. I pray that you have a blessed and an awesome day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.